The New Orleans Saints are officially hosting Carnell Tate for a top 30 visit. We got all of that and more for you today on the Saints Daily Podcast, your home for everything to do with the black and gold. My name is Tim, and let's jump right into the top story. Carnell Tate is going to be coming to New Orleans for a top 30 visit and discuss with the Saints why he would be a good pick at number 8. Now, I know there are a lot of reservations, a lot of optimistic opinions on Carnell Tate, depending on who you ask. So I want to quickly back up and talk about what top 30 visits mean. We are at the height of smokescreen season. Any top 30 visit needs to be taken with a grain of salt. So I know a lot of Saints fans seeing this news are a little worried because that might not be their number one pick. On the other side of that same exact coin, a lot of Saints fans might be really happy because we're finally addressing the wide receiver room behind Chris Olave. Some of the things that you have to always take into account with the top 30 visit are, again, it is smokescreen season, but you typically know the prospects that you want to draft before the top 30 visits are even scheduled. A lot of teams already know who they want and what their board looks like. And then they host these top 30 visits for a few reasons. Number one, to scare other teams. Maybe there's a team at pick 11 or 12 that really wants Carnell Tate to fall to them, and they start seeing that the Saints are interested in them. So maybe they trade up to pick 6 or 7 to get ahead of the Saints to make sure that they get Carnell Tate, meaning that a player that the Saints actually want falls a little bit in the draft to them. You also have the potential that this is real, that there is real interest in Carnell Tate. Finally, you have the full on other thing of maybe the Saints just have questions. They're not sure who they want, but they are interested in Tate, and they just have questions for him that they want him to answer. They want to sit with him, they want to talk to him one on one, get to know the human being, and really understand on who they are drafting or passing on in the draft. Another thing about top 30 visits isn't just the draft. A lot of these players that are being drafted on April 23rd will make it to free agency at some point in their career. So this might be scouting 4 years, 5 years, 6 years in advance that this team could be doing on the player. If he doesn't work out wherever he gets drafted, maybe they're gonna have questions. Was it his personality? And go look back on their top 30 visit and the interview they had with them and just the discussions and what they were talking about back then, compare it to what they're going to talk about whenever they actually talk to the free agent 5, 6 years down the road. It is not an uncommon practice. It does not mean the Saints are drafting Carnell Tate, but it does have a lot of potential meanings, and it's something worth bringing up. A couple things about Carnell Tate, and again, the number one thing that I have heard from Saints fans is that he was never a number one receiver on his college football team. So that doesn't mean so that means that he's not going to be a number one in the NFL. And obviously, we all know that that's not true, right? That's not an if-then scenario that's accurate 100% of the time. There are plenty of examples of wide receivers who were number twos, who were number ones on their team in the NFL, and they deserved it. There's a reason why guys like Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown end up being great receivers on their teams, even though they had lackluster college careers. So I'm not trying to say Carnell Tate is those players, but what I am going to say is just because he's not a number one doesn't mean he can't be. I am on record saying that I kind of agree with that thought process, and I still do. I don't think that you can fault him for playing with Marvin Harrison and Jeremiah Smith. I don't think you can, but you also can't ignore the fact that he's never eclipsed 900 yards in college. He's never hit double-digit touchdowns in college. And he never had to face the number one coverage unit because he was across from Marvin Harrison or Jeremiah Smith. So you can't fault him for it. But at the same time, it is a fair concern that you would have if you would draft him. It absolutely makes sense to me. And it's something that I am going to definitely be keeping my eye on, especially if the Saints do end up drafting Carnell Tate. Additionally, another fallout that could happen is if you draft Carnell Tate or any other wide receiver in the first round, that significantly decreases the chances that the Saints do end up drafting Chris Bell, Tyler Shuck's Louisville wide receiver teammate. Somebody who, based off of, and we'll jump right into it, based off of his fit in Kellen Moore's scheme, based off of his comparisons to AJ Brown, seemed to make a little bit too much sense. So if you go with Carnell Tate in the first round, I don't really see this team drafting a Chris Bell in the second round. Even if Chris Bell falls to the third round because of his ACL injury, I don't know if you can go and draft a wide receiver at round 3 whenever you went wide receiver at pick 8. I just think that it's too messy of a situation, and it's not something that you can justify doing, especially with all the other holes that this roster has. Yes, wide receiver is a need. In my opinion, it's not as big of a need as people make it out to be. I think Devon Vele, when he came in, that he had a 4-game stretch, that he looked like he was a guy who belonged in this offense, who belonged in this league as a number 2 wide receiver. You can absolutely get better than Devon Vele. I'm not saying that he's the best number 2 in the league, but if you go with that 4-game stretch, he would be averaging over 1,000 yards and close to 10 touchdowns based off of that stretch alone. So I would really like to think that he can be that number 2 receiver, and it's not a pick that the Saints have to force themselves into at number 8. Outside of Chris Bell, talking about the Carnell Tate fit in Kellen Moore's offense, you would most likely go back to CeeDee Lamb on the Cowboys. And a lot of people hear that and say Carnell Tate ran a 4.5 at the combine. CeeDee Lamb is much faster, different player than Carnell Tate is. And I would challenge you to look at CeeDee Lamb's combine numbers if that's your thought process. Carnell Tate and CeeDee Lamb both ran in the 4.5 range at the combine. Their numbers aren't really necessarily similar in most other areas for combine, but if you watch the games that they play, route running, possession receiver, don't drop many passes. CeeDee Lamb maybe last year had a couple drop passes, but most likely the reason why CeeDee Lamb wasn't a top 10 pick was that 4.5 speed. People expected him to be faster. He wasn't, and he slid. And I don't think that's a mistake teams are making anymore. Players who are that 4.5 range are having their best seasons. JSN, Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown are all guys that are not known for being speedsters. They're all guys who do not have 4.3 speed. They're probably the 3 best receivers in the NFL, at least over the past couple years. You have an argument for those 3 being the top 3. So a Carnell Tate being a CeeDee Lamb in this offense would make sense. I do think a Chris Bell being the AJ Brown and a Chris Olave being the Devontae Smith makes a lot more sense. But again, I'm always open to hearing what the community thinks. So please let me know in the comments below what you think for the rookies and who their comparisons would be for other teams that Kellen Moore has coached, either as the OC with the Philadelphia Eagles, the Chargers, or the Cowboys. I want to quickly pivot now to the Saints have been in France, and this is something that I didn't really see get talked about very much. So I just want to talk about how the Saints being in France is actually a really good idea for this team as they're slated to play the first game that is going to occur from the NFL in France in 2026. Getting Tyler Shuck, Tally Fuaga, and Mrs. Benson over to France is a really good idea to get them familiar with the area, the locals, get just a whole idea of what they're doing and what they can expect whenever they head to play in the regular season in France. Another thing that quietly came out that I didn't see a lot of conversation around is that the Saints ended up getting international marketing deal done in Italy. So they're really cornering that Latin Europe market. They are doing this alongside the France game, that they're bringing in. This is potentially going to open up the Saints to having another international game in Italy if and when that would be scheduled in the future. It's bringing markets globally to a team that is considered a smaller market team in the United States. So potentially a fan favorite across the globe, something that would help sales, help the market in general. And hey, maybe, if Sean Payton's theory of these no calls that keep happening against the Saints don't happen against large market teams, hey, maybe with an international audience, there might be some, fair defensive pass interference calls in the playoffs. Who knows? Something that I'm going to keep my eye on, though, throughout the remainder of the offseason 2026 year and everything is the international game market. Because I know with the 18th game potentially coming about, it's something that everybody's saying is gonna happen, not if it's gonna happen, when it's gonna happen, and what that fallout is. So a lot of teams are probably going to be expected to travel internationally if that would happen. There would most likely be a second bye week if this would happen as well. And every team that travels internationally will have a bye week to help them recover from that jet lag and that international travel. If the Saints are already cornering the market in Italy and France, that kind of immediately puts them there for the home games in those areas, but also spreads that entire team's awareness around in other markets and allows the Saints to be potential home favorites or home field advantage teams in these neutral sites. You ever watch an international game, there's a home team and an away team, and it's a flip of the coin of who's actually going to have the fans and the home field advantage with those fans. So maybe getting a Who Dat chant in Italy going even before a game is scheduled is part of the plan and the process, and it's some really interesting and well thought out forward thinking, in my opinion. Finally, I want to talk about the Zach Wilson signing. This is something that happened a while ago, something that I wanted to talk about earlier, and this just feels like the right time with other comments that are being made about Zach Wilson being brought in, not just as a mentor, not just as a piece to be, a quarterback room that needs a veteran voice and not just to be a camp arm, but he's being brought in to compete for quarterback two. Real quick, the Zach Wilson story, for those who aren't aware, this is a guy, BYU quarterback, had the throw of the century at his pro day, second overall pick to the New York Jets. He did not work out. The Saints will be his fourth team in a very short time span. And the reason why that's important to all talk about is because if there's a guy who can help maybe navigate Tyler Shuck through these high expectations that are on him right now, let's be real. The Saints winning 4 of their last 5 games last year, regardless of who they played, there are expectations now for Tyler Shuck and for the Saints offense, team in general. If there is a guy who can help navigate Shuck through those expectations and help him if and when some of those expectations are not met, whether it's because he lost a game throwing an interception or fumbling or had a rough game where he had multiple turnovers, he has a guy in the locker room now who can be like, hey, man, I did that in front of New York's media market. Like, it's fine, get better, and be that voice of reason. But another reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I thought it was pretty interesting to hear that Zach Wilson and Tyler Shuck were part of the same recruiting class from high school to college. They were part of the same Elite 11 recruiting class, and Zach Wilson actually said that he knew who Tyler Shuck was back then because Tyler Shuck was one of the top prospects, and Zach Wilson at that time was not. Zach Wilson was actually basically saying, "Hey, like I ended up being the number 2 overall pick, but like 4 years ago, this guy was top of the class. I was at the bottom." And it's kind of funny how their careers have kind of done a full 360, right? 180 from college production. Seeing Tyler Shuck have to, you know, stay in college a little bit longer due to injuries. Zach Wilson leaving college early, number 2 overall pick, and then now both playing for the Saints. One guy in his second year, one guy on his fourth team at this point in time, and the guy on his fourth team kind of being brought in to be the mentor, right? This is a quarterback room that heading into last year, the only player on the roster who had a win as a starter at quarterback was Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill's probably not on this roster in 2026. So you're looking at Rattler, who has one win to his record, and Tyler Shuck coming into his second year, not again as experienced as you would want it to be. Bringing in a guy like Zach Wilson makes a lot of sense. The fact he's competing for QB2 is, I mean, it's probably lip service. It's probably, hey, there's going to be a competition, even though we all know it's going to be Rattler. But hypothetically, it does bring up a scenario where Zach Wilson looks really good in camp. He shows he knows the offense. He shows that worst case scenario, he comes in, he doesn't lose you the game. He might not win it for you, but he can run the offense and not lose you a game. At that point in time, you have a guy in Spencer Rattler who, by all accounts and purposes, last year played really well. It's just that the results weren't there as a team. It wasn't necessarily him, and I think most Saints fans can agree to that. With that being said, there is a chance that Spencer Rattler could get traded to a team. Maybe Aaron Rodgers doesn't come back for the Steelers. Maybe they need a quarterback and they want to throw a third round pick the Saints way and get Spencer Rattler. The 2027 draft is definitely a draft I would stock up as many picks as you can get. Based off of everything I'm hearing, this is supposed to be another really, really strong draft, a lot stronger than the 2026 draft. So if you can get capital by trading away your backup quarterback and maybe throwing a flyer out there on a Drew Aller or Carson Beck or Nussmeier this year, or just waiting until next year and signing another veteran free agent to fill out QB3, I'm all for it. At the end of the day, my original thought process for Zach Wilson is he's probably a camp arm, a Jake Haener replacement, guy who's going to run the practice squad. I'm happy to hear that he's getting an opportunity to compete for QB2. I think over his career, he's definitely learned a lot and he's matured a lot. And I'm really excited to see what that locker room interaction is going to look like and how close this QB room can get. They're all around the same age. They all seem to be similar kind of people. They all seem to, have a little bit of that like cockiness to them that you want from your quarterback. I think Zach Wilson's grown up a lot in the NFL. He maybe has become a lot more humble, and I think you look at what Shuck and Rattler both went through in college, and they also have that humbled demeanor as well. So I think this is a good room that can gel together and really help each other out and answer some questions that maybe they didn't have outside of Taysom Hill as that point of contact to answer those questions. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm very interested to see how this offseason plays out. I'm very excited for the draft. I cannot wait to start doing deep dives on film and how I think these players are going to fit either the offense or defensive schemes. So please stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this video, please press the subscribe button, drop a like, share with a friend, and as always, we'll catch you next time.